The sun had barely risen over Red Hollow, Arizona, when the bells of the small wooden church began to ring. It was supposed to be the happiest morning of Clara Whitmore's life. The entire town had been waiting for this day. The Whitmore family name was respected across the valley. Her father, Thomas Whitmore, owned thousands of acres of land, hundreds of cattle, and had enough money to make people listen when he spoke. And his daughter Clara was considered the finest woman in town. Kind. Beautiful. Educated. The type of woman people believed was born for a life of comfort. That morning, women from the town were preparing her wedding dress. The musicians were warming up. The guests were arriving. Everything was ready. Everything except Clara. Because when she opened her eyes that morning, she did not feel like a bride. She felt afraid. Something was different. Something was wrong. She slowly lifted her hand from beneath the blanket. And froze. Around her wrist was a strange symbol. A dark mark painted carefully across her skin. An Apache symbol. She had never seen it before. She did not know who placed it there. She did not know what it meant. But deep inside, she felt that this symbol was connected to something from her past. Something she had forgotten. Something that was about to change her entire future. Before anyone could explain it. Before anyone could stop her. Clara disappeared. The woman who was supposed to walk toward the altar that morning never arrived. The church waited. The groom waited. The entire town waited. But Clara was gone. And nobody knew that the reason behind her disappearance was not fear. It was not rebellion. It was not betrayal. It was because of a promise. A promise connected to a man everyone believed was not worthy of her. A man named Elias Carter. Years before that wedding morning, Elias was just a simple ranch worker living outside Red Hollow. He did not own a beautiful home. He did not have a family name people respected. He did not wear expensive clothes or carry himself like the wealthy men in town. His hands were rough from years of labor. His boots were worn. His cabin was small. To most people, Elias was invisible. The wealthy families passed him without a second look. Some people even laughed when they heard him dream about owning his own land someday. They believed dreams were only for people with money. And Elias had none. People often said. He was not enough. Not enough money. Not enough status. Not enough power. But what they did not see was the kind of man Elias truly was. He was the man who stopped working to help a wounded animal. The man who repaired a neighbor's fence without asking for payment. The man who shared his food even when he had little left. Elias was poor in possessions. But rich in character. And that was something Clara noticed. Their first meeting was not dramatic. There was no grand moment. No music. No impossible coincidence. It happened on an ordinary afternoon near the river outside town. Clara's horse had escaped while she was riding alone. The animal ran toward the rocky hills, and Clara tried to follow. But the trail became dangerous. The wind grew stronger. The ground became uneven. She realized she could not handle it alone. Several men from town saw what happened. But they kept riding. They had places to be. Problems that mattered more. Then Elias appeared. He was returning from work, covered in dust, carrying his old tools. When he saw Clara struggling, he did not hesitate. He followed the trail. He found the horse trapped near a steep area. The rescue was difficult. But Elias stayed calm. He brought the animal back safely. Clara looked at him with surprise. She expected him to ask for something. A reward. A favor. Anything. But Elias simply said, "Your horse needed help." That was all. No pride. No demand. No attempt to impress her. And for the first time, Clara saw something different. She saw a man who did not measure his worth by what he owned. After that day, their paths crossed more often. Sometimes at the market. Sometimes near the ranch. Sometimes by the river where they first met. Their conversations started small. A few words. A simple smile. A quiet moment. But slowly, Clara discovered the person behind the worn clothes. She learned Elias could read. She learned he saved money every month because he wanted to build something of his own. She learned he carried pain from a difficult past but never allowed it to make him cruel. And Elias discovered something about Clara too. She was not like the wealthy people who looked down on him. She cared about others. She listened. She saw him. But Elias was afraid. Because he knew the truth. A man like him was not supposed to love a woman like Clara. Her father would never accept him. The town would never understand. And Clara's future had already been planned. A wealthy marriage. A powerful family connection. A life chosen by someone else. Elias tried to stay away. He told himself it was impossible. He told himself he should let her go. But every time Clara smiled at him. Every time she looked at him like he mattered. That feeling became harder to ignore. Because sometimes the heart does not care about money. It does not care about status. It does not care what the world says is possible. And Elias knew he was standing at the edge of something dangerous. A choice that could change his life forever. He knew he shouldn't. But he couldn't stop. After that first meeting near the river, Elias Carter tried to convince himself that it was only a small moment. A kind act. A simple conversation. Nothing more. He told himself Clara Whitmore was just someone he helped. Someone who would return to her wealthy family and forget about the poor ranch hand who pulled her horse from danger. But Elias was wrong. Because Clara remembered. She remembered the way he helped without expecting anything. She remembered how he looked away when she thanked him, almost embarrassed by the attention. Most men in Red Hollow tried to impress her. They talked about their money. Their land. Their success. But Elias talked about simple things. The weather. The animals. The people who needed help. And somehow, those simple conversations stayed in her mind. Days passed. Then weeks. And slowly, without either of them planning it, they began meeting more often. Not because they had a reason. Because they wanted to. Sometimes Clara would ride near the edge of her father's ranch and find Elias repairing fences. Sometimes Elias would deliver supplies to town and somehow find himself walking near the Whitmore property. Neither of them admitted what was happening. They were careful. They knew the world around them was watching. In a small town, rumors traveled faster than horses. And people already noticed. They noticed the rich ranch owner's daughter speaking with a poor worker. They noticed Clara smiling when Elias approached. They noticed Elias looking at her like she was the only person in the valley. But they kept their feelings quiet. Because both of them understood the danger. One afternoon, Clara found Elias sitting beside the river after a long day of work. His hands were covered in dirt. His shirt was worn from years of labor. She sat beside him. "You work too hard," she said. Elias smiled slightly. "Hard work is all I have." Clara looked at him. "No. It's not." Elias turned. "What do you mean?" "You have kindness. Patience. You care about people." Elias looked away. He was not used to hearing those words. People usually noticed what he lacked, not what he carried inside. For most of his life, Elias had heard the same message. You are poor. You are unknown. You will never reach the level of men like Thomas Whitmore. But Clara saw something different. She saw a man who was building himself even when nobody applauded. Still, Elias was afraid. Because he knew feelings were not enough. Love did not erase the difference between their worlds. Her father would never approve. The town would never accept it. And Clara was already promised a different future. Her father had arranged a marriage with Henry Caldwell, a wealthy businessman from another territory. Henry had land, money, influence. Everything Elias did not have. To Thomas Whitmore, Henry was the perfect choice. A man who could protect the family name. A man who could expand their wealth. But Clara did not feel the same way. Henry spoke about possessions. Elias spoke about dreams. Henry wanted to own everything around him. Elias wanted to build something that mattered. And that difference became impossible for Clara to ignore. One evening, Clara and Elias met near the old wooden bridge outside town. The sunset covered the valley in golden light. For a moment, they forgot about everything. The expectations. The rumors. The impossible future. Clara asked quietly. Do you ever wonder what your life would be like if people did not judge you? Elias looked at the river. Every day. Then why do you keep trying? He thought for a moment. Then answered. Because a person cannot change what others see, but they can change who they become. Those words stayed with Clara. Because she realized something. Elias was not waiting for someone to save him. He was becoming someone worth believing in. But Elias still carried a heavy fear. He believed loving Clara might destroy the little peace he had. He believed reaching for something impossible would only remind him that he was not enough. So he tried to create distance. He worked longer hours. He avoided the places where he might see her. He convinced himself that letting her go was the right thing. But Clara noticed. And it hurt. One day she found him near the barn. Why are you avoiding me? Elias stayed silent. Did I do something wrong? No. Then why? Elias looked at her. And for a moment, all the words he had been hiding almost came out. Because the truth was simple. He was afraid because he cared too much. I don't belong in your world, Clara. She looked at him sadly. Who decided that? Elias had no answer. Because deep inside, he knew the answer. The world decided. The wealthy. The powerful. The people who believed a man's value came from what he owned. But Clara saw something else. She saw a man who had nothing but still gave everything. And that was the beginning of something neither of them could stop. But love between two different worlds always comes with a price. Because soon, Elias would have to make a choice. Stay silent and lose Clara forever. Or stand before the man who controlled her future and fight for a chance. Something was growing. Something real. Something dangerous. Because sometimes the hardest battles are not fought with weapons. They are fought against fear. And Elias was about to face his greatest one. Something is growing. But it's risky. For weeks, Elias Carter tried to convince himself that staying quiet was the right thing to do. He told himself that loving Clara Whitmore from a distance was better than bringing pain into her life. He told himself that a man without wealth had no right to stand beside a woman raised in a world of privilege. But every time he saw Clara forced to smile beside Henry Caldwell. Every time he saw her preparing for a future she did not choose. Something inside Elias broke a little more. Because Elias finally understood something. Losing her without trying would hurt more than failing. So one cold evening, when the sun was disappearing behind the Arizona mountains, Elias made his decision. He would stop running. He would stop hiding. He would tell the truth. Not because he believed he was better than Henry. Not because he thought money did not matter. But because Clara deserved to know that someone was willing to fight for her. Elias walked toward the Whitmore ranch. Every step felt heavier than the last. He knew what waited for him. Thomas Whitmore. A man who had spent his entire life building power. A man who measured people by success. A man who would look at Elias and see only what he lacked. But Elias kept walking. Because courage was not about having no fear. It was about moving forward while fear was still there. Inside the ranch house, Thomas was sitting near the fireplace when Elias entered. The room became silent. Thomas looked surprised. Elias Carter. Yes, sir. I did not expect to see you here. I know. Thomas studied him. You usually know your place. The words were sharp. But Elias did not step back. I came to speak honestly. Thomas leaned back. About what? Elias took a breath. About Clara. The room changed. Thomas already knew. He had seen the looks. The conversations. The way his daughter's eyes followed Elias whenever he entered a room. You came here to ask for my daughter. Elias nodded. Yes, sir. A long silence followed. Then Thomas stood. You. His voice was calm, but disappointed. You have no land. Elias stayed quiet. No family name. Silence. No money. Elias lowered his eyes for a moment. Because every word was true. Thomas stepped closer. You are a good worker, Elias. I will give you that. But my daughter was not raised for a life of struggle. Those words hurt. Because they were exactly what Elias feared. That no matter what he did, he would never be enough. Thomas continued. Clara deserves security. Elias finally looked up. She deserves happiness. Thomas looked at him carefully. For a moment, he saw something unexpected. Not anger. Not pride. Determination. Elias was not demanding anything. He was asking for a chance. But Thomas was not ready to give his approval. You think love is enough? No, sir. That answer surprised him. Elias continued. Love is important. But a man also needs responsibility. Strength. The ability to protect what matters. Thomas watched him. Because that was the first time Elias sounded less like a poor worker asking for permission. And more like a man accepting a challenge. Still, Thomas refused. You want my approval? Yes. Then earn it. Clara, who had been listening from the hallway, stepped forward. Father. Thomas raised his hand. No. He looked at Elias. You want to prove you can stand beside my daughter? Elias nodded. Then leave. Everyone froze. Thomas explained. The Northern Valley needs workers. A new settlement is being built there. The conditions are brutal. Winter is coming. Elias understood. This was not a simple job. It was a test. Thomas continued. Go there. Work. Help those people survive. Build something with your own hands. Clara looked worried. Father, that could take months. Yes. Thomas looked back at Elias. And if you return? He paused. If you return as the same man who left, nothing changes. Elias understood the meaning. Thomas was not testing his strength. He was testing his character. Could he endure hardship without praise? Could he lead without power? Could he continue when nobody was watching? Thomas looked at him. You may come back with nothing. Elias thought about Clara. He thought about his future. He thought about the possibility that she might move on. That she might forget him. That the entire journey could mean nothing. There was no promise waiting. No guarantee. Only uncertainty. But Elias knew something. A person's worth was not proven when life was easy. It was proven when there was no reward. When nobody was cheering. When walking away would be easier. He looked at Thomas. Then at Clara. And quietly said, I'll go. Clara's eyes filled with emotion. She wanted to stop him. She wanted to tell him he did not need to prove himself. But deep down, she knew. This was not only about winning her father's approval. This was about Elias becoming the man he always believed he could be. The next morning, Elias packed his few belongings. No celebration. No crowd. No promises. Just a lonely road ahead. As he rode toward the northern valley, he carried one thought in his heart. He was not leaving to become worthy of Clara. He was leaving to prove that he was worthy of himself. Because the hardest battles are fought when nobody knows your name. And now, Elias was about to face the greatest test of his life. No promise. No guarantee. Just the test. The northern valley was nothing like Red Hollow. When Elias Carter arrived, he immediately understood why Thomas Whitmore had chosen this place. It was not a place where a man could simply work hard and go home at sunset. It was a place that demanded everything. The wind was colder. The land was rougher. The nights were longer. The small settlement was barely surviving. Families lived in unfinished cabins. The roads were broken. The supplies were limited. And winter was coming fast. Elias stepped off his horse with only a small bag of belongings. No money. No title. No guarantee. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody cared that he wanted to marry the richest man's daughter back in Red Hollow. Here, everyone had their own problems. The first morning, Elias woke before sunrise. While others were still asleep, he was already repairing damaged fences. He carried heavy wood. Fixed broken tools. Helped rebuild homes. He did not complain. He did not wait for someone to thank him. He simply worked. Hard work in silence. At first, people questioned him. They had seen many men arrive with big promises. Men who talked about what they would do. Men who disappeared when things became difficult. But Elias was different. He did not talk about changing the valley. He just started changing it. Day by day. Piece by piece. One afternoon, a storm damaged several homes. The settlers panicked. They did not have enough materials. They did not know how they would survive the winter. Elias gathered the men. We repair what we have. One man laughed. With what? We barely have enough wood. Elias looked around. Then we use what we have better. That night, instead of sleeping, Elias worked. He showed the others how to strengthen the walls. How to save materials. How to prepare before the next storm. Slowly, people began following him. Not because he demanded respect. Because he earned it. Weeks passed. The cold became worse. Snow covered the valley. Food became harder to find. And Elias faced the hardest part of the test. Nobody from Red Hollow was watching. Nobody knew if he was succeeding. Nobody knew if he was suffering. There was no reward waiting at the end. Only the choice to continue. Meanwhile, far away, Clara waited. Every day she wondered if Elias was safe. Her father watched her quietly. He expected her feelings to fade. He believed distance would change everything. But every letter from the Northern Valley proved otherwise. Elias was not chasing comfort. He was building character. One evening, while checking the edge of the settlement, Elias found a young boy sitting alone. His name was Samuel. The boy was around 10 years old. His family had lost their cabin during the storm. His father was injured. His mother was trying to keep everyone fed. Samuel sat quietly, staring at the broken pieces of wood. Elias walked toward him. "You planning to fix that all by yourself?" The boy looked up. "I don't know how." Elias sat beside him. "Then learn." From that day forward, Samuel followed Elias everywhere. Elias taught him how to repair fences. How to handle horses. How to work with patience. But more importantly, he taught him something nobody had taught Elias when he was young. That being small did not mean being weak. One day, Samuel asked, "Were you always this strong?" Elias smiled. "No." "Then how did you become strong?" Elias looked toward the mountains. "By having moments when I had every reason to quit." Those words stayed with the boy. Because Samuel was learning more than survival. He was learning courage. Months passed. The settlement slowly changed. The same people who once doubted Elias now looked for his advice. When there was a problem, they came to him. When there was danger, they trusted him. He became a leader without asking to be one. That was the difference. A true leader does not need a title. People follow because of what they see. Not what they hear. But the test was still not finished. One night, the cold became unbearable. A supply wagon failed to arrive. The settlement was running low on food. Some people wanted to leave. They believed survival was impossible. Elias stood before them. He did not promise an easy future. He did not pretend everything would be perfect. He simply said, "We stay together." Those 3 words gave people strength. Because they realized something. Elias was not trying to prove he was better than them. He was standing with them. That winter changed him. The poor ranch worker who left Red Hollow searching for approval was gone. In his place was a man who understood responsibility. A man who had carried other people's burdens. A man who learned that respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. Slowly. Quietly. Through action. And somewhere far away, Thomas Whitmore began to understand the truth. The test was never about whether Elias could survive the winter. The test was about whether Elias could become the kind of man who deserved a family. A man who could lead. A man who could sacrifice. A man who could choose what was right even when nobody rewarded him. Because Elias had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes life gives you no sign that you are doing the right thing. Sometimes there is no applause. No promise. No guarantee. You simply keep going. And that is where character is built. But now, after months of struggle, the winter was finally ending. And Elias had one final journey ahead. The journey back to Red Hollow. Back to Clara. Back to the man who sent him away. The question remained. Would Thomas Whitmore see the change? Would Clara still be waiting? And would Elias finally receive the respect he had earned? The answer was waiting at home. He returned with nothing. But everyone saw the difference. The first signs of spring had finally reached Red Hollow. The snow around the northern valley began to melt. The frozen river started moving again. And after months of struggle, Elias Carter was finally riding back home. But he did not return the way people expected. He did not arrive with bags of gold. He did not bring expensive gifts. He did not ride a powerful horse wearing new clothes. He returned the same way he had left. With worn boots, simple clothes, and an old saddle that had carried him through the hardest season of his life. To anyone watching from a distance, it looked like Elias had gained nothing. The same poor ranch hand had returned. The same man without wealth. The same man people once believed was not enough. But those who looked closer saw something different. The young man who left Red Hollow had been searching for approval. The man who returned no longer needed it. The journey had changed him. The cold nights. The endless work. The responsibility. The people who depended on him. All of it had shaped him. He was calmer. Stronger. More certain. He had learned that a man's value was not measured by what he owned. It was measured by what he did when life became difficult. When Elias rode into town, people noticed. The same people who once ignored him now stepped forward. They had heard stories from the northern valley. They knew how he helped families survive. How he protected the settlement. How he taught a young boy named Samuel to believe in himself. They did not see a poor worker anymore. They saw a man. But one person remained silent. Thomas Whitmore. Clara's father stood outside the ranch house as Elias approached. There was no celebration. No warm welcome. No dramatic words. Only a quiet moment between two men. Thomas looked at him carefully. Months earlier, Elias had stood in this same place asking for a chance. Back then, Thomas saw a young man who loved his daughter. Now he saw something else. A man who had faced hardship and did not run. A man who had been given every reason to quit. But continued anyway. Thomas asked. How was the valley? Elias answered simply. Difficult. Thomas waited. Did you regret going? Elias thought about the freezing nights. The hunger. The exhaustion. The moments when he wanted to give up. Then he shook his head. No, sir. Thomas studied him. Why? Elias looked toward the land. Because people needed me. That answer stayed in Thomas's mind. Because he finally understood. Elias had not gone north to prove he was worthy of Clara. He had gone because he was willing to carry responsibility. And that was exactly what Thomas had wanted to see. A wealthy man could buy land. A powerful man could control others. But character could not be purchased. Thomas walked closer. You came back with no fortune. Elias nodded. Yes, sir. No new land. No. No proof that you became richer. Elias looked at him calmly. I learned something more important. Thomas raised an eyebrow. What? Elias answered. I learned what kind of man I want to be. For the first time, Thomas had no argument. Because he realized the test had already been completed. Not when Elias survived the winter. Not when the settlement praised him. But when he continued even without knowing if anyone would ever recognize his effort. That was the moment Elias proved himself. Thomas did not give a long speech. He did not suddenly become a different person. He simply placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. A small gesture. But one that carried meaning. You have earned something many men with money never receive. Elias looked at him. Respect. Those words meant more than any wealth. Because Elias spent his whole life hearing what he lacked. Now, finally, someone saw what he had. Later that evening, Elias met Clara near the river. The same river where everything began. She looked at him quietly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Because some emotions are too deep for words. Finally, Clara smiled. You came back. Elias nodded. I promised I would. She looked at him. No. You came back because you became the man you were always meant to be. Elias smiled. And for the first time in many months, he allowed himself to believe that maybe the impossible was possible. The road ahead was not easy. There would still be challenges. There would still be struggles. But now they would face them together. Because Elias had learned the truth. A person does not become valuable because the world finally accepts them. The world accepts them because they first prove their own worth through action. He had faced the cold. The loneliness. The uncertainty. And he had survived. Not with money. Not with power. But with patience. Sacrifice. And courage. The man everyone underestimated had returned. And now everyone knew. He was never lacking. They were simply too blind to see him. The man everyone underestimated became the man everyone respected. The morning of Clara Whitmore and Elias Carter's wedding was unlike the first wedding day that had been planned. Months earlier, Clara had woken up with a mysterious Apache symbol on her wrist and disappeared before reaching the altar. That day was filled with confusion. Fear. Questions. But this time. There was peace. The church bells rang again. The same small church that once waited for a bride who never arrived was now filled with people who came to celebrate a love that had survived every challenge. Clara stood at the entrance wearing a simple but beautiful dress. She looked toward the altar. And there he was. Elias Carter. Not a wealthy man. Not a powerful man. Not someone who suddenly became important because of money. He was still Elias. The same man with honest eyes. The same man who worked with his hands. The same man who helped others when nobody was watching. But now everyone saw what Clara had always seen. A man of character. As Clara walked toward him, she remembered the first day they met. The river. The runaway horse. The quiet stranger who helped her without asking for anything. Back then, she thought Elias was different. Now she understood why. He was never trying to become someone else. He was simply becoming the best version of himself. When they stood together, Clara looked at the symbol on her wrist. The Apache mark that had caused so much confusion. The symbol was no longer a mystery. Years earlier, Clara had helped an injured traveler near the valley. Among those who found him were Apache people who respected her kindness. The symbol placed on her wrist was a sign of protection. A reminder that kindness creates connections between people. That one act of compassion can return in unexpected ways. Clara smiled as she looked at Elias. Because in many ways, that symbol represented their entire journey. A reminder that one small choice can change a person's destiny. After the wedding, life did not suddenly become perfect. There were still difficult days. There were still storms. There were still problems to solve. But now Elias and Clara faced them together. They built their own ranch. Not the biggest ranch. Not the richest. But one filled with purpose. They welcomed travelers who needed help. They cared for injured animals. They supported families who had nothing. And years later, the same valley that once called Elias not enough, now told stories about him. People talked about the poor ranch worker who became a respected leader. The man who survived the harsh winter. The man who helped a settlement without expecting a reward. The man who earned everything through action. And Samuel, the young boy Elias helped during the winter, grew into a strong young man. He never forgot the lessons Elias taught him. One day, Samuel asked, "What was the hardest part of the test?" Elias smiled. "Not the cold. Not the work." Elias shook his head. "The hardest part was continuing when I did not know if it would matter." Samuel looked confused. Elias continued. "Anyone can work when there is a reward waiting. The real test is what you do when there is no guarantee." Those words explained everything. Because Elias's greatest victory was not marrying Clara. It was not gaining Thomas Whitmore's approval. It was not earning the respect of the town. His greatest victory was the moment he chose to step forward without knowing the outcome. The moment he said yes. Yes to the challenge. Yes to the struggle. Yes to becoming better. Even when nobody promised him success. Because life does not always reward people quickly. Sometimes the reward comes later. After the sacrifice. After the patience. After the moments when quitting feels easier. But the people who continue. The people who keep their word. The people who do the right thing when nobody is watching. Those are the people who build something lasting. The story of Elias and Clara was never about a poor man becoming rich. It was about a man discovering that his greatest treasure was already inside him. Character mattered more than wealth. Respect was earned through action. And the most important moment of Elias Carter's life was not when the world finally accepted him. It was when he believed in himself before anyone else did. When he walked into uncertainty. When he faced the impossible. When he said yes. Even with no guarantee. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you enjoyed this emotional frontier story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable journeys of courage, love, and sacrifice. Because sometimes, the person everyone says is not enough, is the person who proves they were more than enough all along.